Imagine being humiliated, insulted, and arrested just because of the color of your skin. But what if the people who thought they had all the power suddenly realized they were messing with someone untouchable? This is the story of two racist cops who thought they were above the law, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. You won't believe what happened next. Racism has a way of showing up in the places we least expect, even in those sworn to serve and protect. Today, we're diving into the unbelievable story of a black woman who faced blatant racial discrimination from two police officers. They insulted her, handcuffed her, and dragged her to court like she was a criminal. What they didn't know: she was the wife of their police chief. This isn't just a story about injustice, it's about how karma hit them back hard. It was an ordinary afternoon, or so it seemed. A black woman, dressed elegantly, stepped out of her car to grab a coffee from a local cafe. Little did she know, two officers parked nearby had already decided she didn't belong in the neighborhood. Their eyes followed her every move, not because she was suspicious, but because her skin was enough to make her a target. As soon as she walked back to her car, the officers approached. Without asking any questions, they demanded her ID. Confused but calm, she asked why they needed it. That simple question was enough to set them off. "We don't need to explain anything to you," one of them barked. Their tone was aggressive, and their words dripped with condescension. When she hesitated, trying to understand what she'd done wrong, the situation escalated. They accused her of being uncooperative and suggested she might be trying to hide something. In reality, she was simply standing her ground, something these officers clearly weren't used to. Before she could respond further, they grabbed her wrists and forced her into handcuffs. The scene was public, humiliating, and completely unjustified. Bystanders watched in disbelief as the woman, who had done nothing wrong, was treated like a criminal. Some recorded the incident on their phones, but others simply walked away, unwilling to get involved. As they shoved her into the police car, she calmly stated, "You're making a mistake." But the officers weren't listening. In their minds, they had already judged her. She wasn't a person to them, just another stereotype they could control. At the station, things got even worse. The officers refused to let her make a phone call, ignoring her legal rights. They mocked her, laughed at her, and made derogatory comments about her race. One of them sneered, "People like you think you can do whatever you want, but not today." Despite their attempts to break her spirit, the woman remained composed. She knew the law better than they did, but she chose to stay silent, waiting for the right moment. She didn't argue, didn't beg, she just watched as they dug themselves deeper into trouble. The next step was taking her to court. The officers prepared their fabricated reports, accusing her of resisting arrest and being unruly. They were confident that no one would question their version of the story. After all, who would believe her over them? But there was one thing they hadn't counted on. This wasn't just any woman. She wasn't someone they could bully and discard. What they didn't know was about to turn their world upside down. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The black woman, who had endured insults, humiliation, and wrongful arrest, stood silently, her head held high. The two officers, confident in their fabricated story, smirked as they presented their version of events to the judge. They painted her as aggressive, uncooperative, and even threatening. To them, it was just another day of abusing their power, but they had no idea their world was about to collapse. As the officers recounted their version, something remarkable began to unfold. A few witnesses from the scene had come forward voluntarily, armed with video recordings of the incident. These videos painted a very different picture, one of blatant racial profiling, unprovoked aggression, and utter disregard for the law. The defense attorney calmly played the footage in court, allowing the judge and everyone present to see the truth. The officers' smug expressions quickly faded. The footage revealed how they had approached the woman without cause, escalated the situation unnecessarily, and treated her with nothing but disrespect. The courtroom fell silent as the reality of the officers' actions became undeniable. Then, the twist hit like a thunderclap. The woman's defense attorney dropped the bombshell. "Your Honor, the defendant is not only innocent, but she is also the wife of the city's police chief." The revelation sent shockwaves through the room. The officers, previously so arrogant and sure of themselves, were now visibly panicked. They exchanged nervous glances, realizing the gravity of their mistake. The police chief himself entered the courtroom shortly after, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. He didn't say a word, but locked eyes with his wife, who gave him a small nod, a silent reassurance that she was fine, at least physically. What followed was a scathing rebuke from the police chief. Standing before the judge, he condemned the actions of his officers, emphasizing that their behavior was not only a violation of the law, but also a betrayal of the values the police department was supposed to uphold. "These officers were sworn to protect and serve," he said firmly. "Instead, they chose to humiliate and oppress. This is not just a mistake, it's a disgrace." As the trial continued, the officers' defenses crumbled. Under pressure, they admitted to falsifying their reports and conceded that they had no legitimate reason to stop the woman in the first place. Their racist biases were laid bare for all to see. The public quickly caught wind of the story, and the backlash was immediate and fierce. Videos of the arrest and courtroom proceedings went viral, sparking outrage across social media platforms. People demanded accountability, not just for these two officers, but for the systemic racism that allowed such behavior to persist. The police chief wasted no time in addressing the situation publicly. At a press conference, he announced that the two officers had been terminated from their positions effective immediately. "This department has no room for individuals who abuse their power and act on prejudice," he declared. "We are committed to rebuilding trust with our community, starting with holding these men accountable." But the story didn't end there. The woman, though vindicated, decided to take further action. She filed a lawsuit against the police department, not for personal gain, but to bring attention to the broader issue of racial profiling and police misconduct. "This isn't just about me," she said during an interview. "It's about every Black person who has faced discrimination and injustice at the hands of those who are supposed to protect us." The case became a rallying point for activists and community leaders, sparking important conversations about racism within law enforcement. Protests and marches were organized in support of the woman, demanding comprehensive reforms in the police department. Meanwhile, the disgraced officers faced not only public humiliation, but also potential criminal charges for their actions. Their once bright careers in law enforcement were over, and their names became synonymous with corruption and bigotry. The woman's courage and composure throughout the ordeal inspired countless others to speak out against similar injustices. Her story became a powerful reminder that even in the face of systemic racism, it's possible to fight back and demand change. As the community rallied together, the police department began implementing new policies to prevent incidents like this from happening again. Mandatory anti-racism training was introduced, along with stricter oversight of officers' conduct. These changes, though small steps, were a direct result of one woman's refusal to be silenced. In the end, the officers' downfall served as a stark warning to others who thought they could abuse their power without consequences. The story was no longer just about two racist cops, it became a symbol of accountability, justice, and the ongoing fight against racism. The turning point came when the judge called the officers to the stand. Their arrogance, which had carried them through the initial stages of the case, was now replaced by visible fear. The evidence presented against them was damning. Video recordings, witness testimonies, and the undeniable revelation of their blatant misuse of power. The courtroom atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as the two officers attempted to justify their actions. Their statements, however, only made things worse. One officer stammered through his testimony, trying to explain why they stopped the woman. She seemed suspicious, he claimed, avoiding eye contact with the judge. But when asked what exactly made her suspicious, he had no answer. The second officer tried to shift the blame, suggesting that they were simply following procedure. But the evidence made it clear. There was no legitimate reason for their actions. The judge didn't mince words. "This isn't just a case of misconduct," she said sternly. "This is a clear example of racial profiling, abuse of power, and the violation of an innocent citizen's rights." Her voice echoed in the courtroom, and the officers hung their heads in shame. The woman, who had been calm and composed throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. Her words were measured but powerful. "You didn't see me as a person," she said, looking directly at the officers. "You saw me as a target, as someone you could intimidate and humiliate without consequences. But today, you're learning that actions have consequences." The courtroom erupted in applause, a rare and emotional moment that underscored the gravity of the situation. The officers were ordered to stand as the judge delivered her verdict. Both were found guilty of misconduct, falsifying reports, and violating the woman's civil rights. They were immediately stripped of their badges and escorted out of the courtroom in disgrace. But the consequences didn't end there. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, holding signs and chanting for justice. News cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the scene to a nationwide audience. The fall of the two officers became a symbol of accountability, sparking conversations about racism and police reform across the country. The police chief, who had been watching the proceedings closely, addressed the crowd. His voice was steady but tinged with emotion. "Today, we saw justice served," he said. "But this is just the beginning. My wife's courage in standing up to these officers has exposed a problem that goes far beyond this one incident. As police chief, I am committed to ensuring that no one in this community, no matter their race, ever has to face this kind of treatment again." The woman, standing by her husband's side, became a voice for change. In interviews with the media, she spoke about the importance of holding law enforcement accountable. "This isn't about punishing two bad cops," she said. "It's about addressing the system that allows people like them to abuse their power. This is about ensuring that every black person in this country can feel safe and respected, no matter where they are." The story didn't just end with the officers losing their jobs. Legal proceedings were initiated to hold them financially and criminally accountable for their actions. The woman also worked with community leaders to push for broader reforms within the police department. New policies were introduced, including mandatory body cameras for all officers, increased training on racial bias, and stricter oversight to prevent similar incidents. The ripple effect of the case was felt nationwide. Activists and organizations used the story as a rallying point, organizing marches and campaigns to demand justice for victims of racial profiling. The video footage of the woman's wrongful arrest became a powerful symbol, shared across social media with hashtags calling for change. For the officers, their downfall was swift and unforgiving. Public outrage ensured that they wouldn't find work in law enforcement again. Their names became synonymous with corruption and racism, a permanent stain on their reputations. But for the woman and her family, the outcome was bittersweet. While justice had been served, The experience left scars. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I did," she said in a heartfelt interview. "This fight isn't just about me, it's about all of us. And it's far from over." As the community rallied around her, the woman's story became a beacon of hope and a call to action. Her bravery in standing up to injustice reminded everyone that change is possible, even in the face of systemic racism. The officer's fall wasn't just their personal failure, it was a victory for accountability, a step toward dismantling a system that had long protected the guilty at the expense of the innocent. Don't miss more stories like this. Subscribe now for more eye-opening content. Please note this is not a real story. It's a fictional story for education and entertainment purpose.